So, guys, I want to talk about the episode Apologies to Jesse Jackson's. And yes, I did review this episode a couple of years ago, but there's more people talking about this episode right now, so I figured, why not do it again? And definitely, like, this episode has a lot of different things about race in America, and definitely double standards, and a lot of other things that go on. So, I want to explain this episode scene by scene. So, first of all, it opens with Randy Marsh appearing on Wheel of Fortune, and he answers a category where it goes, where the clue is people who annoy me, and then instead of you see NGGERS, so he doesn't know that it's not he doesn't know that naggers is a word, so he says niggers, and then and then it beeps and everything like that, so it's definitely played to be comedic because there are times when people accidentally just say things that they're not supposed to say, and we all laugh at it. Like sometimes there are videos on Instagram or YouTube about like how kids cannot say words correctly, so they may say an offensive word or an N word, and like if a kid's instead of Nutter Butters, there may be some kids that are like 3 or 4 years old may say nigger butters or something like that, like um, just to kind of be like, okay, well, I don't know how to say these words correctly. So I think it's kind of alluding to how, normally sometimes when we look at comedy shows like the Chappelle Show, or we look at a show like the Boondocks, we kind of find funny when people use that word. Or sometimes, as I was saying before, that sometimes you watch a thing on Instagram where you have kids who don't know how to say words correctly. Um, sometimes we laugh, or sometimes when people make a faux pas and slip up and accidentally use that word, we're all about the humor instead of the actual, like, how serious it is. Because, in the South Park world, people are upset with Randy, but the viewer at home are more so laughing at his faux pas. And then the next scene, what happens is they drive home, and then Randy's justification is that he was going to win $50,000, and he tries to justify himself to his son. So definitely that goes with, one of the things they talk about in South Park, a lack of responsibility, because Randy should have said, yes, I should have just said to myself, like, more than likely it's going to be a vowel, so maybe I should have just guessed, naggers, and the one with a word with the E, a word with the U, a word with the O, a word with the Y instead of the N word at the very, very end. And then he also had to say to himself, you know what, it was stupid because, Wheel of Fortune is a TVG show. Do you really think that they're going to, have that as a final answer? It's not. Wheel of Fortune set in 1864 or something like that. So what happens that Stan goes to school, and what happens is that Stan explains to Token that's not a big deal, and his dad is just an idiot, and definitely there is that side too of, okay, well, everybody should know that it was a very consequential mistake, and at this point we've not seen Randy be racist, but I definitely think that there's Token side, which is saying, what, it is a big deal, and the one themes of the episode is we should not use offensive language or racial slurs because we don't know how it feels for that other person. For example, I watch The Sopranos. I know, like, Tony Soprano says Shylock business a lot. I'm not Jewish, so I don't know how that hurts Jewish people. Or, you watch Carlos Mencia, and he says wetback a lot of times. I'm not Hispanic. I don't know how it feels for wetbacks. I don't know how it feels when wetbacks, the word is used around Hispanics. I'm part Native American, I'm part black. I've been called a nigger many times in my life. So, definitely when I hear the word nigger, it causes a lot of anger. It causes like a pressure in my chest, and it makes me cringe sometimes, So, definitely, there's plenty of white people who watch Dave Chappelle and other people who quote his uses of the word nigger and nigga. There's a lot of people who listen to rap and quote rap and repeat rap lyrics and say nigger or nigga who are white or other races, and they don't understand that it's not it's still offensive. So definitely what Token's saying is very powerful because there's a lot of people like who are like, what, it's just another word, or you're making it a big deal, or it's not said in a racist way, so therefore it's people being drama queens nowadays. So then the next thing that happens is they invite a little person. And I want to more so focus on Randy, but the whole arc of the little person is really how there are people like Cartman who never ever change their views. Like he's always going to laugh at the little person. He's probably going to find things like Randy did funny, and he's never going to learn to be a better person. So it's definitely sad, but that's just how some people are. Some people are like the Eric Cartmans who don't change. There are people like Stan who want to psycho meditate on the race issue and be like, okay, well, I want to understand. I want to be a better person. At the end, he does. And then the other thing about the midget is that he's actually kind of a good character because he's true that there are people who are trying to advocate going forward and don't let things hurt you. I mean, don't be hurt by words. But at the end of the day, that's also a bad message because there's two things that happens. He learns to be complacent, and it doesn't solve the issue of racist people. You can't just say, "Oh well, words shouldn't hurt you." That's teaching complacency, and what all that does is teach you to harbor anger, and that's kind of what he did. He goes from trying to teach people to be sensitive to differences to actually saying that he's not going to be hurt by Cartman's words, and words are like bullets when words do hurt. And then the next thing that happens, he gets angry at Cartman because he gives into that because those words do hurt, being called a midget, being made fun of for being little. And then he actually fights Cartman, so he goes down to Cartman's level. And actually, Cartman wins the fight. So sometimes, you know what, that old philosophy of like words are like bullets, it's just not a big deal. That's kind of, I think, the central point. And I also think that with the little person character, he's trying to advocate that is very well taught. And that was a lot of what older generations did. They taught their children, somebody says the word nigger, calls you the word nigger, you just go out in the street and you just apply for a job. You go study harder. You just give that hard American work ethic. And that was also taught during the Jim Crow era, that whenever bad things happen to black people, or black people called niggers, or when black people's houses were burned down, you're supposed to beat your chest, go out and just be a hard-working black man. And that's not good because that just teaches what you're seeing with the little person is whenever people do bad things to me, definitely just be complacent. And just do nothing about it. And I'll even say this, that, I saw a counselor for like 10 years, and one of the reasons why I broke it off with him was that he was teaching that philosophy of that I dealt with workplace bullying, I dealt with workplace violence, I was almost murdered by the police, but his philosophy, it was figure out a way to move on, suck it up, work very hard. And he was also Jewish, and he always had that type of white savior thing, just trying to be like this. My relatives died in the Holocaust. That's a big deal. But when it comes to you dealing with racism or whatever, you just gotta move on and not hold other people accountable. No mutual accountability thing. In addition to just saying, oh, well, the solution is just to move on and work very hard, and you're lazy for not applying yourself. Sometimes there are things that happen to us. There are hurtful things that are said to us and hurtful words, but we can't always respond to just by working hard and moving on, because you become like Mr. Nielsen in this episode. Even though he's successful, he learned to move on and not let things get to him. But there's a certain point where everybody has a breaking point, and then his breaking point was getting down to Cartman's level. And then also, what happens with Randy is that he goes to a comedy club, and there's a black comedian, and he says, oh, well, wave to the nigger guy. And it kind of goes to what I'm trying to say, and I think a lot of people overlook in this episode, is that during this time, Dave Chappelle was very popular, and other black comedians who were using the N-word a lot. And then it kind of inspired a lot of white people to use the N-word in a joking way, or just be like, oh no, I'm quoting Dave Chappelle or whatever. Or when a black person says the N-word, a white person quotes what they have to say, really. So definitely black culture and black comedians definitely did inspire white people to use that word. And also there wasn't a lot of just and that's happened at some concerts recently, where sometimes if there's a black rapper and he's like saying lyrics that have the N-word, and he sees a bunch of people who are white using, he may stop and be like, hey, just, say N-word, or just, bleep it out or whatever. But back then it wasn't like that, and like I've gone to high school, I've been in different, and I've gone to college, and I've definitely noticed when people like say that, not a big deal. Um, then other things happen to Randy. Like first of all, I think that they're trying to say that when it comes to the use of the N word, Randy's supposed to be a metaphor for black people being called the N word, and how in the black experience. So in the first sentence, you see him just getting his feelings hurt, people not taking it seriously, and that's kind of very true to like the 2000s culture when comedians used the N word and not realizing the damage and how it became complacent. And then also too, you look at the old Jim Crow and other songs that were popular in the 1800s. It it also made using the N word kind of comedic. So it's like everybody likes the joke, but except for the person that's making fun of. And then you also look at Birth of a Nation and other films back then, which were meant, and like Disney and Looney Tunes and the blackface and all that type of things that were meant to be comedic about racial racist depictions of African Americans. So the first side of it is people look at the N word and its usage and the racism as comedic. The next part of it is that when he walks down the street, people call him a nigger guy. So it kind of goes back to what you saw in the 1950s, where people just thought it's okay to casually call somebody a nigger or use the word nigger around somebody. Great example was when I went to college. I remember I went to Northern Vermont University, and I remember like I had a professor. I was talking about Joseph Conrad saying Heart of Darkness was a great example of a psychological thriller. He said, what about Joseph Conrad's other book, Nigger of the Narcissus? Nigger of the Narcissus. And then my professor looked at me and said, oh, I didn't realize that there was a black man in the room. And he would also call me black boy and black student. But great, that's just an example of what I dealt with. Another example is when I was in college, when I would walk down the hallway, people would be calling me a nigger sometimes. And then also another thing that happened to me in college was like, I remember I would work hard and some people would say things like, boy, can't you be like that nigger Byron? And you need to be like that nigger Byron and actually work hard like he does. So I used to call nigger a bunch of times in college. So I think that when I kind of look at how Randy's been called, it definitely kind of hits home. And then there's also like, that thing that happened where he goes in the store and he's told to leave. And definitely, I've had experiences like that too. Like I remember like when I was in middle school, I'll go to like some restaurants as a kid and then some people be walking out or like, I don't want this kid around. Or sometimes, like when I was in college, there'd be people like saying, I have a daughter, she's into black guys and other things like that. Or like when I did the 40-hour film project for New Haven, Connecticut, the first thing that happened was the city producer's friend, this guy named Doug was like, it's great that a black guy is doing it this year. And they're like, which was kind of weird. And the city producer was like, doing this. She's kind of doing this to me. Give me that type of look. First thing is those looks of kind of like, it kind of like people pointing out race. And that's not good. Even if it's not directly saying the word nigger, there's always a sense of harassment, subtext, microaggressions that happen that people deal with, and Randy's kind of like encapsulating it. So it's also trying to make to the central point is that now you kind of are Trey Parker Metstone trying to give you the best look at a black experience, and then a black racism, and then another motivation of why you don't say that word. So I think that, as some people say when you watch this episode, it's almost like kind of a white person simulation of what it's like to be called an N-word in the most respectful way possible. And then what happens later on is that Randy donates to a black scholarship, and it kind of alludes to how like there's some white people who think the best way to solve their problem whenever they get involved in these controversies is just to donate to black causes and to be like, now I'm a great white person for doing that, or I'm going to adopt a bunch of black kids. I'm a great white person for doing that, instead of personal growth. And then the last thing is that he gets that term banned, nigger guy. So it's kind of like what they say that, because a lot of politicians are white, that maybe if there were some words or some things that kind of made a witch hunt for people to be labeled as racist, maybe that would be shut down in America, because to preserve to preserve, like the status quo or people's positions. So it's definitely kind of interesting, but it's also kind of tells you what happens, that usually if there's a white agenda, even if it's supposed to benefit white people or the white race, usually that gets first priority. Like they say, you look at, look at Ukraine and Israel. A lot of the people there are white, but most people but like people in Flint, Michigan, and other places in America are struggling. We send billions of dollars to other countries that mostly have white people or Jewish people, but in America, when it comes to blacks and other minorities, money's not usually that well spent on them, really. So definitely, I think that also them banning the word nigger guy in Washington D.C. is kind of like a little alluding to how politics and policies are always made to help the white race and just the majority race, which is whites. And then also people just believe whites are superior because of politics and other things in media. So it definitely alludes to how it doesn't Randy doesn't solve his problem. And I also think that the thing about Stan realizing I don't get it, and that's the message. I don't get it, so we should not. I don't get it. I don't understand how it feels for a black person to be called the N-word. I think that that's kind of like the beautiful message, and I think that the hope of it is that Carbon Copy Stan Kenny were all born in the early '90s, I believe. So it's kind of like the hope of saying, the next generation will probably get that it's not okay to use those words, and hopefully we can be better over time, really. And kind of as I said, you see some people who are more reactive when people use that word and other words like that, and like I said, even though I'm mixed race and I've been called a nigger, and I have people assume that I'm black, and I've had people assume that I'm like a rapper or a gangster or other things like that. I've been called out, even if I'm trying to use it in a way where I'm quoting, or in an episode like this where I think it's a little bit more appropriate to use that word. I've had people call me out for that, and that kind of shows the change. And I've also felt really good a few years ago, because I remember somebody on Facebook was saying, "No, Byron, you're a black guy, da 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 da," and I remember saying, "No, I'm actually biracial," and then he actually apologized, and that meant a lot to me, because through my life I've been known as a black man, not not a multiracial person. So I definitely think the hope is that we can all change. And I also think that the other message is that, honestly, unfortunately, there will be people like Cartman in the world who are always going to be ignorant, and who are always going to laugh, and always not going to find the deep meanings in things. And definitely that's a personal choice. I remember doing a review of the Chappelle Show, the Clayton Bigsby sketch, and I remember getting massive hate on YouTube. Yes, it wasn't a well-made video because I was young and I wasn't good at articulation and other things, but it was also because people said, we want to laugh, we don't want to dissect the message. There are people that don't want to be educated. And then there's also people like Randy Marsh who do bad things, and they choose not to learn their lesson. They choose to kind of do the best that they can to kind of take the repercussions, the hate off of them, and that does not teach growing. That teaches ultimately, I don't like the repercussion, I want the repercussion to end. But it's definitely a very powerful episode, and it's definitely a very cerebral one. And I definitely think that, for everybody, we should all watch our mouths. And definitely there is entertainment like the Chappelle Show, The Sopranos, and I don't mind movies using those words, or literature or whatever, but in general talk, those words are very taboo. And definitely if there are films that use those words, I know people don't overlook how Martin Scorsese uses the word nigger in Taxi Driver, or Quentin Tarantino says the word nigger, dead nigger storage in Pulp Fiction. That, you always have the right to scrutinize writers and artists for using that word, just as you have the right to scrutinize people in everyday life. But ultimately, words do hurt. Words represent a lot of just different feelings, and we have to be careful what we say. And ultimately, if we're trying to use racial slurs in an artistic way, or in a way to hurt somebody, or in a way to be funny, just remember, there's a lot of words that may not be associated with you personally, but they carry a lot of pain, and they should not be used at all. But on the contrary, we do have freedom of speech, and that's that, really. But the other thing, as the message goes, we should always watch our mouths, because we don't understand how those words hurt other people. I was misdiagnosed with autism, And I remember, like, sometimes people have called me retarded, and I have parents who are gay, so I remember hearing the word fag and faggot and sexual harassment words. So, all words are painful. Me and my brother have weight issues. So I know it's like when we were younger, we used to call each other like fat ass or fat fuck. It's still painful words, So always just kind of be careful of the words you use. We should always just kind of be respectful to each other. And definitely don't go by Mr. Nelson's philosophy of all words are just like bullets. I let them fly by me. It takes collective damage, and let's treat everybody with respect and kindness.